Well, and you see that particularly in California. And, you're watching American politics. I am too, with just absolute disgust. I look at the two candidates and I think, oh, Lord, help us. I mean, truly, Lord, help us. But if Trump had a lick of sense, and he doesn't, because his ego is just completely out of control, and he's always, complaining about how badly the world has treated him. But if he had a lick of sense, on every campaign stop, he would be saying, you want to vote for Kamala? She is going to bring California energy policies to the rest of the U.S. And it's going to be on greenhouse gas emissions. It's going to be on electric vehicles. And you can look at what the Biden administration has done. And their greenhouse gas rule on power plants will force the closure of all the remaining coal plants in America and will prohibit the construction of new gas-fired power plants to run at baseload unless they're using carbon capture. So it's a recipe for disaster. But you're already seeing it the same in many parts in Canada, in British Columbia. I mean, that's the land of fruits and nuts in Canada for sure.
You're going to like this. Robert Bryce has been writing, researching energy-related issues, for over 30 years. He's written 6 books. The latest one, very good book, called A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. He's done 2 documentaries, and let me just tell you about one of them. The latest is Juice. You can go to YouTube, you can rent, you can watch. Great stuff. He's a very popular writer on Substack, and you can find him, of course, on substack.robertbryce.com. YouTube, he does a series of short videos on a wide-ranging array of energy topics. So I am just absolutely thrilled to welcome him back to the show. Robert, thanks for finding time for us.
Michael,
you are busy, by the way. You are very busy.
Well, I'm very fortunate, Michael. I'm incredibly fortunate in my life, my career. Got married to an amazing woman for now going on 40 years. Well, we're 38, 3 great kids, and my work is my purpose and my passion. So I'm incredibly fortunate.
But you're crisscrossing the states. You're in this town, you're in this state, you're in another one, speaking on this very, key topic. And that's why I thought I wanted to start with you coined this sort of the law of electricity. Maybe explain.
Sure. I call it the iron law of electricity. And I didn't borrow. I stole the concept from my friend Roger Pilkey Jr., who coined the iron law of climate, which says when forced to choose between action on climate change and economic growth, policymakers will always choose economic growth. Well, I thought about that, and traveling around the world and seeing it myself, I coined the iron law of electricity, which is that people, countries, businesses will do whatever they have to do to get the electricity they need. And I've seen it myself. And I live in Austin, Texas. What did I just put in a Generac at my house, a 22 kilowatt Generac, because I'm concerned about the reliability of the grid. So this iron law of electricity has been proven over and over again. And that's why we see this enormous increase in coal demand and coal consumption in India and China, for instance.
And Germany, we could throw them in there.
Well, we could as well. Vietnam, Indonesia, the list is long.
But Germany was just so ironic because they decommissioned their nuclear plants and not figured out, hey, wait a second.
And they congratulated themselves all along, didn't they? They congratulated themselves. We're so good. We're so righteous. We're so virtuous. And they've driven their economy into the ditch. Yeah. And if I were a better person, maybe a better Christian, I'd feel sorry for them. I don't. They did this to themselves, and they did it in this way that, we're just leading the world. No, you're wasting $1 trillion on the energy venda, and they put their economy in the ditch, and it's going to be in the ditch for a long time.
Let's talk about nuclear, though, because I was thinking again, looking forward to chatting with. I thought, at least maybe I could start with something positive. There has been progress, but I love the way you've been writing and explaining to people. Yeah, it's progress, but it's not overwhelming. It's not, a step is important, but it's not getting us there. There's so much more to do, I guess is a better put.
Sure. And we'll start with the positive headlines that we've seen just in the last few weeks and a few months. In March, Amazon announced it had purchased a data center from Talon Energy next to the Susquehanna nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. And so they're going to use that for their data center and for zero carbon electricity. Just in the last few weeks that we've seen Microsoft announce that it's going to participate with Constellation Energy in restarting the 3 Mile Island reactor and to use for its data center. Oracle has claimed they're going to use 3 new SMRs, unspecified what company, what technology, to run a new data center campus with 1 gigawatt of capacity. The Palisades nuclear plant in Michigan is being restarted. So those are all positive, but you're a Canadian. I think it's also clear that Canada is going to lead the global nuclear comeback, and Canada is far ahead of the U.S. And in fact, just to revert to the U.S. for a minute. So we've had this spate of good news, but the point that I made recently on my Substack, and thank you for plugging it, robertbryce.substack.com, is nuclear now, part 2, in which I just said that, yes, it's easier to start these old reactors than it is to build new ones. And in fact, today, there's not a single new nuclear reactor under construction in the United States. There is one in Canada, a BWRX 300 in Ontario. So Canada has the infrastructure, it has the workforce, and it has the political momentum now. So Canada, Western Europe, China, India, they're going to lead this the ongoing resurgence in nuclear, with China far in the lead. But their nuclear capacity that they're building now is about 30 gigawatts. They're building 170 gigawatts of new coal capacity.
Wow. There's so many questions around the nuclear. One is cost.
Sure.
One is the permitting process, how long it takes to get something in play. Other obstacles, like have they started to figure out where they're going to get the uranium, which I suspect that I haven't read much that encourages me on that front. I'm just sort of I am positive, and we've been supporting nuclear on this show for ages, but I'm just saying there's a lot of obstacles still in the way, and some of them very practical.
Well, and the cost issue is key. And it's one of the things, though, that you have to put into perspective. So we hear over and over again by the the climatists and the promoters of wind and solar. Oh, wind and solar are the cheapest. Okay, well, let me agree for the sake of discussion that yes, they're the cheapest, but are they the most valuable? So you can call it a pup tent or a little canvas tent housing. It's not really a good house. A brick house is far more expensive, but it's a far sight better house than that little pup tent you just put up. And so, we'll call it the levelized cost of housing. Well, your tent is going to blow over in a fierce storm. My brick house won't. So I think that one of the key problems, Mike, and I think it's key that we keep it in perspective, is yes, nuclear's upfront costs are high. There's no doubt about it. And we've seen that with the Vogtle reactors, units 3 and 4 at Vogtle in Georgia. But the long-term costs are low. So that requires a shift in thinking. And, that in fact, yes, the cost may be less, but the value is less too.
I'm skipping around a little bit because it's a huge subject, but wind and solar, you are the only person with the database, with Power Hungry, that talks about, hey, it's not so simple. There's opposition. You keep track of the opposition. The projects have been proposed and then refused by the local. I mean, that still seems to be a huge obstacle. Can you elaborate on that? Give us a little background too.
Sure. Well, happy to do so, because it's something I'm very proud of, and I've worked at now for 15 years on my own time, on my own dime. I keep the renewable rejection database. And why did I start doing it? Well, very simple. W. Edwards Deming, the famous industrial analyst, said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." So I'm bringing the data, and the latest numbers, I'm just looking at it now. There have been 739 rejections or restrictions of wind and solar in the United States since 2015. And now I could track them in Canada. In Ontario, you have nearly 100 communities that have declared themselves unwilling hosts. But this year alone, we've had in the U.S. 62 rejections or restrictions of solar, and let me see, 36 rejections or restrictions of wind. The latest was in Newton Township, Pennsylvania, last month, where the township officials rejected a project that was being proposed. It was 24 acres of solar panels. And locals are all, it's not just the U.S. and Canada, it's all around the world. Local communities, rural communities are saying, we don't want this energy sprawl. We don't want our neighborhood to be overwhelmed by these, oceans of solar panels and forests of wind turbines. And I don't blame them. And I'll just add one other quick point, Mike. This is one point that to me is just, it really, as my late brother John Bryce used to say, grills my cheese. How these elite reporters from the New York Times, Washington Post, National Public Radio, they don't know any of these local people. They don't travel in rural America, and they don't give a damn about them. And so they call them NIMBYs, and they ignore these issues. But I spend a lot of time in traveling in rural areas, and these local people, I love them. I mean, I do deeply admire them and love them for what they're doing. And like everyone, they care about their neighborhoods, their neighborhoods.
I want to stay with the wind and solar for a moment, because talk about an impractical, approach to power. But one of the other things that I got on robertbryce.substack is about the copper. I mean, that's something that's a theme that I've certainly touched on. But give us, even if we said yes, and in those cases, let's highlight they're saying no. But even if they said yes, you've got huge issues with whether you're getting the panels out of China and all that entails, but the other raw materials, the electrification of the grid. The list is just so long, and I'm just surprised that the impracticality of it has not been more front and center.
Well, it's becoming closer to front and center, Mike, and it none too soon. I do travel a lot, and I was in Denver. This morning I spoke there last night. I was in Tulsa last week, and Sunday I'm going to Chile, and I'm speaking at a mining conference, and I'm focused directly on copper. And these projections on the, because of the alt energy push, the energy transition push, all of the projections that are being put out, it doesn't matter who you're looking at, McKinsey, Goldman, name your different analysts, they're all projecting massive increases in copper demand to meet this energy transition stuff, from electric vehicles, from, electrification, et cetera. And it's not clear at all to me that we can mine enough of the stuff to make it happen. But meanwhile, the prices are going up, and they're going to continue rising because the mines are taking even longer to open, around 20 years, 18 years now, from discovery to production is the average in the last few years. And what we're seeing as well is you have the supply chain issues with the materials, but we're also facing a labor shortage. And it's something else I'm going to be writing about in the next few days, is this overall inflation across the economy because of commodities, but also because of the shortage of skilled labor.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels overwhelming in terms. I'm surprised that more people who aren't climate change activists, let's say, or proponents, don't talk about this, because it's never happening. I mean, you've also got grid challenges. I know you've written a great deal of good stuff about electric vehicles, and let's get, sort of the Robert Bryce approach is let's get practical. Oh, we're not,
Well, and this is where we're just inundated with spin. I mean, we are just inundated with spin around these ideas and these claims. Oh, we'll just double or triple the size of the electric grid. This is something that this study that was done by some academics at Princeton University got lavish praise in the New York Times, and it was front page in The Economist. And, oh, well, of course we can do this. The hell you will. You don't understand what you're even talking about. The scale of the challenge is just enormous. And that's the fundamental issue. And it's one I wrote about in my fourth book, Power Hungry. It's always about power density, energy density, cost, and scale. And the scale part of this is the one that, the reporters and the academics don't want to talk about. So I'll just give you one quick point on electric vehicles. I live in Austin. There's a Tesla factory here. You want to give me the guess about the total percentage of electric vehicles of the 286 million vehicles in America? How many of them are all electric? Go ahead, give me a guess.
Are we at 10% yet?
1%.
1%. Wow.
So they're in high single digits now of new car sales, but new car sales are not the entire fleet.
Yeah.
So all of this hype, we're just inundated with it. Oh, electric vehicles, they're going to change. And now in the US and in Canada, and I had a piece in the Financial Post in June talking about this, that, the Canadians in the US are saying we're going to mandate electric vehicles. Well, first, it's completely impractical. And second, we're handing our supply chain vulnerability to the Chinese. I'm not a China basher, but what in the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
Why in the world would you make one of your most important industries, the auto sector, dependent on China? It just makes no sense to me at all, Mike. There's just this lack of critical analysis that it's been replaced by activism and this climatism.
But I think that the point you just made is the key one, though.
Yeah.
We have replaced any kind of critical thinking on so many of these things, and it's gotten us trouble. We mentioned Germany a few minutes ago. Well, it got them in trouble. Do you think surely somebody should have said, if you knock out nuclear, you got to replace it with something? And what is that something? And, oh, that's intermittent. I mean, some of the most straightforward critical thinking questions aren't being asked. And again, when you come to electric vehicles, I mean, the infrastructure has to be so broad. The grid has to change so dramatically. The power sources or the ability to create the electricity. I mean, the list is just a long one. We rarely talk about it.
Well, and I think it's important to understand too. I mentioned the inflation before, and I in my head, I have to write the headline usually before I write the article, because I'm a newspaper guy. That's my history. I've come from the old days where you actually read the thing on paper. I mean, it was a long time ago now, but that's where I came from. the electric grid in the U.S. is being shorted by inflation. Now that's my headline. Inflation is shorting the power grid, and it's being so. There are several factors at work. The aging of the grid by itself, right? Because you always have to replace old transformers. This electrification push because of heat pumps, EVs, and AI, and then you have now the latest is Hurricane Helene. So in addition to the war in Ukraine, and it's a global market. So, we're seeing in some cases, I'll write about this, but, some gas plants that are being built or being contemplated for construction in the U.S., you're seeing inflation rates of 75% in less than 2 years. So all of these things are happening at the same time that the administration is saying, oh, we're going to electrify everything. They're all on board with this concept. But this is the part that really does motivate me, Mike, is that I care about the poor and the working class. Who do I love? I love the people who have their names on their shirts at work. But they're completely, in my view, unrepresented in our politics because they're not going to write big checks, and yet they're the ones who are going to bear the brunt of this disastrous energy. I almost said policy. It's a disastrous approach to energy and power.
By the way, I couldn't agree more with that. That's been one of my themes for a long time, is that good for the Liberal government in Canada in terms of political strategy. They came into power in 2015 talking about helping the world's richest middle class, which was called Canada. Even the States was calling Canada. They came in talking about helping them. You look at their budgets and you're going to have literally, though, hundreds of mentions of middle class and 3 of people who are not middle class. They always say the middle class and those who hope to join it. Well, those who hope to join it aren't joining it. They don't look at that side of the spectrum. As you can tell, I'm passionate about that too. Who the most vulnerable are paying the price for all this.
Well, and you see that particularly in California. And, you're watching American politics. I am too, with just absolute disgust. I look at the 2 candidates and I think, oh, Lord, help us. I mean, truly, Lord, help us. But if Trump had a lick of sense, and he doesn't, because his ego is just completely out of control, and he's always, complaining about how badly the world has treated him. But if he had a lick of sense, on every campaign stop, he would be saying, you want to vote for Kamala? She is going to bring California energy policies to the rest of the U.S. And it's going to be on greenhouse gas emissions. It's going to be on electric vehicles. And you can look at what the Biden administration has done. And their greenhouse gas rule on power plants will force the closure of all the remaining coal plants in America and will prohibit the construction of new gas-fired power plants to run at baseload unless they're using carbon capture. So it's a recipe for disaster. But you're already seeing it the same in many parts in Canada, in British Columbia. I mean, that's the land of fruits and nuts in Canada for sure.
By the way, I love your line when you said you were asked about this. You said, look, I'm not political. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I'm disgusted.
And I am completely disgusted.
Well, we could go on and on about that. It's astounding to watch, even when we're not directly involved. I mean, Canadians watch this very, very closely.
Sure.
But oh my gosh. But look at the mandates. You talked about EV mandates. We have one 2035 across the country. I think a couple of provinces are sooner. You mentioned British Columbia; they're pushing sooner, and again with no backup practicality around it. But it's the same with saying we're going to phase out fossil fuels. I mean, there's some very simple questions like, what are you going to do about the 6,000 products that are made with, petroleum-based, products? Of course, we don't talk about anything that's really truly practical.
Or the Haber-Bosch process and the production of synthetic nitrogen, synthetic fertilizers. Without natural gas, you don't have synthetic fertilizer. And I think Václav Smil has calculated, well, that'd kill. You quit using synthetic fertilizer, you'll kill 3-4 billion people. And so there's this ideology. I spoke in Denver last night, and one of the questions from the audience afterward was, this gentleman called this agenda being pushed by the far left and the climatists. He said it's coerced utopia. And I said, well, I understand your argument. And I kind of like that phrase, but really it is dystopian. And, one of the reasons why I'm so pro-nuclear is I want small footprints, right? I'm an avid bird watcher, have been for almost my whole life. I'm going to Chile. We're going to go bird watching after I have my speaking engagement. And this idea that we should cover the natural world, the hillside, the countrysides here in America or in Ontario or Alberta with massive amounts of wind and solar, it's absolute, total, crazy, bonkers, crazy town. I mean, what are you doing? And these NGOs that used to care about the environment now are so wrapped up with climatism that they're in favor of destroying the natural environment. And one positive thing, now I've been growing off here, Mike, but in Alberta, you saw in March, the provincial government announced a 35-kilometer setback for any wind projects. And I think it affects solar as well, from the Rocky Mountain the parks along the Rockies there.
Yes.
And they also prohibited the use of prime ag land for alt energy projects. So that is the strictest setback measure that I know of anywhere in the world. And I follow this pretty closely. So there are signs that there's some, sanity occurring around the world. And God bless Canada.
One of the things, obviously, in this show we look at is finances. And
sure.
I'm looking at, we still haven't had a realistic costing of net zero or even of the major steps toward net zero. Yeah. And I think people are shocked. I mean, they've seen their electricity or their, over time, those power bills go up. But, net zero is going to be an incredibly expensive, like profoundly expensive, proposition.
Well, and you're right. And there's no doubt that it will be expensive. But my short take is that it won't happen because it can't happen. I mean, there's just limits on the scale of the system.
Yeah.
We don't have enough land to put all these wind turbines and solar panels. We're going to rely on China for all of this kit. Well, China's going to take care of itself. So we haven't had enough pain, I guess. I spoke at an event last summer, and there was a guy who was a former Marine Corps officer, and he said, "Oh, we have enough." How did he put it? He said something like, "We still have enough slack in the system in the United States that we can absorb some of these crazy policies." But, as in, the provinces in Canada, some of them have declared net zero. We have states like Colorado, New York, California declaring net zero goals. It's going to end in tears, but there's going to be a lot of money wasted.
Yeah. And a lot of pain along the way. And especially it starts at the lower end, the most vulnerable, can't afford these, and then, and works its way up. If I was going to, I'm sorry, this is, I'm famous for asking, influenced by Barbara Walters, and ask these simplistic questions. But in 25 words, what do you think the biggest myths out there about this whole thing? Is it, are they just related to practicality, or is what you've just alluded to? We're not going to have the space anyway, so forget that. Or we're not talking about China enough and the way they control the supply chain and refined, rare earths, that kind of thing. If we could sort of wave a magic wand, at least get a step toward practicality here.
So the question is, what is the biggest misconception? What's the biggest myth? Well, in one sentence, is the biggest misconception, the biggest fraud is this claim that we can run our economy solely on alt energy. Yeah. Full stop. I mean, it just can't be done. I flew from Denver to Austin today. Oh, right. We're going to run that 737 on batteries. I mean, come on, look at all the the trucks that are on the going over the road. You can't, diesel fuel and oil is a miracle substance. If it didn't exist, we'd have to invent it, Mike. I mean, it's just, there's nothing else that comes close in terms of energy density, ease of handling, transportation, flexibility. It's incredible what we do. And there's no conspiracy here that, Exxon bought the patents or something. There's a conspiracy of math and physics, but the public and policymakers don't know the math. They don't know the physics. They can't be troubled to learn it. And so, we get this bad policy, and the policy's passed by lawyers. And why are all of our lawmakers lawyers? Because they couldn't do the math to get into engineering school.
Well, and we mentioned earlier about fertilizer. That was something I was on about all the time, is that you need the natural gas for, you need ammonia, you need urea. And look what it did to Sri Lanka. Pushing up the price of fertilizer to such a degree that they had people in the streets. And if I was a politician, I'd pay attention, because they were literally hunting politicians. Because, you fool around with food, with energy, you're asking for big time trouble.
Exactly. And Sri Lanka provides the perfect example of what can go wrong, what will go wrong. And I'm just looking, as we're talking about, some of the prices on trading economics on commodities, and copper continues to rise. Tin is going up. And these are, some of the critical commodities. Natural gas still in the U.S. is fairly cheap, $2.83 today. But some of these trends that we're seeing in the commodity markets, I think, are inexorable. And
Yeah.
and I don't know what your thinking is, but it's one of the questions I like to ask people. And it's the $10,000 question. If I gave you 10 grand and I named you my fiduciary, and I said I want the maximum return on this money in the next 10 years, where would you put it? And I get all kinds of responses. Gold, Bitcoin,
Yeah.
S&P 500 index. But to me, it's an interesting question because it indicates where people's, how they view the world, right? And a lot of people are saying go into commodities, and gold has gone on a tear. But I'm just curious, well, it's your show, but I mean, if I turn the tables on you, what would you do? Gold's up 45% year on year.
Well, I mean, one of our long-term themes has been you're watching the consistent debasement of the purchasing power of currency. People talk inflation, it's that. I talk about the debasement of the currency. So I sort of ask a similar question. I said, let's put a pile of money here, and we could go with 10,000. And it's going to be in the dollar and all that kind of US dollar and all that stuff.
Right.
And this pile is going to be in commodities like oil, though. I would include, oil and energy in my mix. We have been big time supporters of gold, again, just on the basis that they're eroding the purchasing power.
Yeah.
So gold has done a great job. Bitcoin, we have not been major pushers of Bitcoin, mainly because I don't trust government. I kind of like it, and I like all the reasons people are in it, but I don't trust government. And by the way, I wish I had bought more Bitcoin, and I have nothing against Bitcoin in any way. My against is government intervention. So Bitcoin.
So gold's up 46%, silver's up 54%, copper's up 27%, platinum's up 15%. But the other key commodities, soybeans, wheat, wheat's up 2%, soybeans down 18%. I like asking the question because it's as confusing a world as I can remember in my lifetime. Potential war with Iran, and they're already shooting each other with Iran and Israel, with Hamas, Hezbollah. I mean, it's a mess, right? And we have the mess in Ukraine, and yet it seems the stock markets in the U.S. anyways, continue to do pretty well. But it's incredibly confusing. But to get back to what we've been talking about, what I see now, and particularly in the electricity sector, is rapidly increasing prices, and they're going to continue to rise because of these increased pressures on the grid managers, the generators, to provide reliable power under all of these mandates that are coming from the federal government and these decarbonization strategies that are rewarding weather-dependent generation. So I hate to say we're headed for a perfect storm, but we are degrading the resilience, reliability, and affordability of our energy and power systems, and we're doing it on purpose.
Yeah, it's astounding, but I tell you, it gives you lots of food for thought, lots of subjects to write on, speak about. And again, I want to recommend the book, A Question of Power. It's one of 6, but A Question of Power, Electricity and the Wealth of Nations. But also check out Juice, the latest documentary Robert's put together. You can find it on YouTube, but of course, find him on Robert.
JuiceTheSeries.com. Did I mention JuiceTheSeries.com, no, Mike? I hope I mentioned JuiceTheSeries.com.
We sure will. JuiceTheSeries.com, but also go to Robert Bryce at Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. Robert, I hope we can visit again. I just love having a chance to talk with you and pick your brain. Terrific stuff, though. Seriously, much needed, sober, fact-based, no spin information on this very, very important subject. The most important economic subject has got to be energy. So thank you, Robert.
It's always a pleasure, Michael.